Hello, everyone. This is going to be me recapping the latest issue I've read of The Economist. As usual, it's going to be down to our three sections: think tanks, security issues, and cool stuff. So let's get right in. So, the think tank list on this one is rather long, and that's actually a screw up on my part. And the reason for that being a screw up is I'm compiling a list from previous issues I've read, and I only noticed when I was done copying, pasting, and editing, and sizing everything, that I included not just a list of the think tanks and NGOs and NGAs that was actually being done with this issue, but as well I had actually gone through and pasted the other ones. In the future, I'm just going to have a link in the description that you can go to and just see a huge list of those. I'm very sorry about that. So, as you can see here, a lot of the familiar ones. Again, I don't expect anybody to really be able to read this. So, security issue number one is going to be the Ukraine offensive. There's three outcomes. Ukraine could potentially break the Crimean supply line, score a major victory, and maybe even reclaim parts of Ukraine that was taken by the Russians years earlier. Could be just a small scale victory. The worst case, a small scale victory would still make the Russians lose face, although they've already done that. A stalemate is the worst possible scenario, but hey, it could happen. Iraq rises again, but for the Shia. Okay, so this is now the group that's in charge of Iraq. It's, in many ways, you could say that it's the replacement to the Ba'athist Party. That was Saddam Hussein's political party, comprised of all Sunni, I believe, but truth be told, a fairly secularist regime, given that region of the world. And the prime minister put in place by this group is Muhammad al-Sudani. This is very surprising, given that I thought al-Sadr would be the one to rise to power. For those of you not in the know geopolitically, al-Sadr is a popularist Ayatollah, that's the cleric for the Shia, and he was sort of front and center for basically the invasion of Iraq. Another issue to think about for this area of the world is the clerics that have power now are getting very old. They rose to power in the 70s for the most part, and they were not very young people for the when this happened. And when I say the 70s, I mean the 1970s, specifically when we think of Khomeini and seizing the embassy, stuff like that. Myanmar. This is going to break a lot of people's hearts, and it should actually. It's a very sad thing. So, Myanmar has been beset with civil strife for decades. In 1990, the main dictator stepped down from power and was placed under house arrest. Now, house arrest for dictators, not really a thing. And even though he claimed to be under house arrest, I mean, the people really running the show are going to be whoever he put in administration. I don't care what they say about free and fair elections. His influence was going to be there for decades. And, we had the lady won a Nobel Prize in 1991, got elected to whatever the version of Congress is in 2012. And yet, unfortunately, it didn't seem to have much of effect. The Rohingya genocide has gone on. These are just some instances. The junta has retaken power, and so the situation looks pretty grim, and whatever momentum that country had seems to, for the most part, be gone. Now, I want to say in defense of the Nobel Prize winner, some people have wondered how could she stay in government even with all this horrible stuff going on. Sometimes you got to go along to get along. And, let's face it, this lady leaves government tomorrow. and she might not even still be in government. I'm just saying, what would really change. I have a grim quote here that I think nevertheless describes the situation. The junta is too unpopular to control the countryside, yet too powerful to yield the towns, and so the country's wretched, extensive, but mostly low-level conflict will endure. Cool stuff. Okay, Botswana, tiny African country, wants to be a bigger player in the diamond industry, and the government is thinking about making a 25% purchase in HB Antwerp. They want to make money on more than just mining, the downstream stuff. There's multiple ways to make money off of a diamond. Obviously, there's the mining, but then the diamond also has to be cut, and finally it goes through some other processes to when it's sold. That's called the downstream, and good for Botswana for saying they want more of that. The big company they deal with is De Beers. The resources have been taken out of Africa for, I think we can actually say centuries at this point, maybe. And it's high time that these countries and these governments and the people benefit from that. Cool stuff. Georgia peaches. Okay, so I actually was born in Georgia. Although from the South, I do not consider myself Southern. I don't have an accent. I never acquired a taste for Southern cuisine. And last but not least, I actually didn't live in Georgia for that long of a time. But the harvest this year was slim pickings, as they call it. This has been blamed on climate change, although it's predicted that next year the peach harvest will be better because of El Nino. This is kind of tricky for me in how they explain this, because I associate climate change with global warming, and this was actually unusually low temperatures that caused part of the problem, so I'm not really sure what's going on with this. But Pam Knox is the one who's predicting that the harvest will be much better next year. So hey, look, Mason, Erika, take some of that, Michigan State employee money you're making and buy some peach futures. And if it all goes wrong, hey, you get to blame Pam Knox. You know where she works.